we're a product of the universe, and that means that we are the universe, because that means that we are the universe studying itself. We're the only creature that's able to do that, to study itself, to study the universe around us. So we are the universe that's studying itself. But what do we get for that? All that wonder and amazement, the awareness that time goes on, but that we don't. There's a terror of death that motivates so much of our actions. To be able to break out of the safety of the tribe means having to confront this thing right here, death. Having to confront death. To be brave and to be courageous. I mean, it isn't to be the toughest person in the world. It's to be willing to confront the sufferings of life exactly as they are. To confront life exactly as it is. Not necessarily to wish it to be any different from what it is, but to confront it exactly as it is and to say yes. In other words, to say yes to life exactly as it is. I'll talk to you again. Yeah, I know. Twice in a week, right? It's your lucky week. I've decided from now on I'm going to set a timer. Why? Because if I don't, I'll be here all day. All right, so for today, Rollo May. It takes courage to break out of the settled mold, but most find conformity more comfortable. That's why the opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it's conformity. Rollo May. Yeah.
May I say it takes a lot of bravery, strength, and a good mindset to leave something set in place. And most of us feel okay with make comfortable with settling in the set place. He also says the opposite of what that said, bravery, strength, and good mindset isn't just being a chicken and not being able to stand up for yourself, but it's also settling down in a set society. I agree that we tend to say it is what it is, and most of the time I say it myself because I blame it on the fact that I'm a go with the flow person. But I also say it because I'm scared that if I speak up, then I'll just make the situation.
What's a situation you think you can make worse by speaking up?
Like the other day, well, it's more of like with my parents. My dad, he likes to, it's his way or no way type of person, and he always tends to tell me to do things. And it's a little frustrating sometimes because most of the time I can't really change the situation. Like the other day was my laundry. I was folding my clothes, and most of the clothes I was left in the basket were my younger brother's. And he was telling me that I needed to do it, but I was like, if I spoke up and said, no, it's not mine, he was gonna be like, well, you should do it anyways. You have the free time. So I was just like, okay, and I ended up doing it.
Yeah, if we can't change a situation, we have to figure out if it's worth changing ourselves for. What else? Yeah.
Most people today do not take risks or try to be different. Instead, they find comfort in being the same as everyone else. The ones who do try to take risks are ruled out, when in reality people are just ashamed of the fact that they can't find it in them to change and are envious.
What that last part you said, that they can't find it in themselves to change. Why not?
Because they're scared
Of what?
that they'll be made fun of or not taken seriously.
Being judged.
So I guess that's the question. So what's so bad about being laughed at or not taken seriously? Why does that bother us so much?
Some people care too much about what other people think.
Yeah, but why though? I mean, there's a reason for it. It's not necessarily a bad reason.
Or your feelings that.
Yeah. So why would people be afraid of like being laughed at or made fun of? What about that makes us so uncomfortable?
Human behavior,
What's that?
or human behavior, or what days, or a small tribe before,
Explain.
small tribe before, because it's like a small tribe, we trying to fit in. Yeah, if you don't fit in, we get it's stress. It's social pain, like having headaches.
Kind of.
We're gonna have to live our whole lives around most of these people, or at least around people in general, so we care about what people think because that's what we're gonna be around.
Are we adjust to like their aspects and looks on things to like the people we're surrounded with?
And that's why we do it this thing that we seek. There's a deep biological need there for safety. This is something that's really deeply ingrained in us. It goes back to this idea of the small tribe. that if we find ourselves among 50 people, we're strong and we're relatively safe. If we find ourselves by ourselves facing 50 more people, well, that's terrifying. So there's a good reason for it. It isn't just, we oftentimes say like with disdain, like, oh, you're just trying to fit in. But yeah, that's most of us. And there's good reasons for it. It's not just, but it is tied to cowardice in a certain sense, yeah.
Just for the first section, where up until comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
I thought of it as if you have unhealthy habits that you find comfort in.
Oh, like what?
Maybe a lot of people often drink or booze, I don't know.
I know you don't know,
Yeah.
but other people,
Yeah.
they drink and why do they do those things?
It makes them forget.
Makes them what?
It makes them feel safe.
In what sense?
It's like an outlet for things that are on their mind.
So you said that they want to try to forget, and it's kind of like an outlet for that. So it's the same sort of a thing, because think about the kinds of things, and I'm not just talking about somebody who drinks some alcohol and uses it recreationally. I think we're talking about people who become addicted to it, and they go to an extreme in using it because they're trying really hard to forget something.
To feel that first time.
What's that?
They get addicted because they're trying to feel that first, how they felt that first time.
Yeah. So
They're
they're
trying to fill the void.
trying to fill the void. And what's the void made of? What causes the void?
Situations.
Yeah, like what?
Trauma.
Trauma. And so what is when we're talking about trauma? By the way, on Monday, you guys are going to start looking at an article by a guy named Viktor Frankl called The Case for a Tragic Optimism. So the stuff I'm talking about right now, Rollo May and Frankl are pretty closely connected. They were friends. So the stuff I'm talking about right now, I'm trying to pull out of you, is the stuff that if you process it, the article on Monday will be a lot easier. It'll make a lot more sense. And so when they were trying to fill the void, what causes a void in people's life? I know it's a strange question. It sounds like a void would have to be the lack of something.
Traumatic event.
Yeah, like what?
Like
Loss of a loved one. Okay, good. So now if there's a loss of a loved one, what does that remind you about? Might be a bad way of asking the question, but what does that make you think of? Anybody ever been to a funeral before?
Yeah.
A lot of fun, right? No?
Crying
Oh, crying. Why are we crying?
because they were mourning their loss and they felt like that was their way of expressing how they felt.
Yeah, and what they lose?
They lost their family.
Yeah, if I remember. So there's something that's closely connected to all of this. Death. Death. Why do we seek comfort? Why do we seek safety in numbers? Because if we're not safe in numbers, then we're in danger of dying. And there's a deep biological drive in all of us, and there's an unconscious drive in this as well, kind of tied into that collective unconscious, that there's a terror of death that motivates so much of our actions. I mean, if we're thinking about it, for example, why do we have children? It makes no sense. If it's true that we want to enjoy better things in life, we want to buy cars and houses and all those things that we're supposed to want to buy, children get in the way of that. Children get in the way of a lot of life. So it becomes this question, then why do we want to have children? Just because I want to love something. If you want to get a dog, get a kitten. There's lots of things that we can pour our love into. Oh, but it's just not quite the same. And that's true, because there's a biological drive to perpetuate ourselves, because even if I die, at least there's a child left in the world that in some way perpetuates me.
Same genetics.
What's that?
Same genes.
Yeah, at least my genes are in there. And
Genes.
if you think about that, my God, everybody in here, you guys, you're the process of thousands of generations.
Mm-hmm.
You're the pinnacle. And now all of your ancestors are now looking at you like, yeah, go make some babies, make more. And some of you are there, and that's like, I'm never going to have children. And now your great grandfather's like, dude, seriously? We went through all of these thousands of generations, not years, generations, to get here. And you're not gonna, man, I should have just fought that tiger or whatever. But in us, we all have this terror of death that motivates so much of our action. This is why we build big buildings. They're monuments. They're not just buildings, they're monuments. We have families and children because it perpetuates our genes going forward. And this is the thing that's so often in us when we close our eyes at night, right before we fall off into sleep, we wonder, is this what death is going to be like? I pass out and that's it, forever. No consciousness. And there's a terror in us because we all recognize this. It's a cruel joke, actually, that the universe has played on us, that we're the only species that's self-conscious, we're aware of ourselves, and what's the thing that we become most aware of? The fact that we're going to die. Your cat doesn't worry about that. I know for a fact my cat doesn't worry about that with some of the stupid shit he does. And then even little kids aren't really worried about it until their brain develops to the point that they all of a sudden become conscious of themselves. And so that's the trade-off. We become conscious of ourselves. In other words, we're able to understand ourselves in a universe, but now we're able, and that's an amazing thing, by the way, because that means that we're a product of the universe, and that means that we are the universe. That's interesting, because that means that we are the universe studying itself. We're the only creature that's able to do that, to study itself, to study the universe around us. So we are the universe that's studying itself. But what do we get for that? All that wonder and amazement? The awareness that time goes on, but that we don't. And so there's a terror of death that motivates so much of our actions. And you're going to find out when you start on Monday that there's a triad that you're going to talk about. That one of the things that we abuse alcohol and drugs. I'm talking about actually abuse it because we're trying to cover up and fill the void of this thing that terrifies us. So you'll find out that there are a couple of other things, but that's a really big one. It's a really big one. And so to be able to break out of the safety of the tribe means having to confront this thing right here, death. Having to confront death. And that's what it really is. This is bravery, courage. If I ask, what are these things to be brave and to be courageous? I mean, it isn't to be the toughest person in the world. It's to be willing to confront the sufferings of life exactly as they are, to confront life exactly as it is, not necessarily to wish it to be any different from what it is, but to confront it exactly as it is and to say yes. In other words, to say yes to life exactly as it is, with all of its elements of tragedy. Is life tragic? Yes, of course it is. Is life beautiful? Yes, of course it is. Part of what makes death so tragic is that life is so beautiful. If life wasn't beautiful, then death wouldn't be tragic at all. But it's because we recognize that there's beauty in there. And sometimes we'll fill that void, we'll cover it up with that, sardonic, folding the arms and scratching the chin and just, the world's so terrible, things are so bad. Yeah, of course there's tragedy. We were talking about this last week, I think I mentioned this. I talked to you last week, didn't I? Yeah, wasn't it last week too? Oh. I thought it was last week also. But anyway, we talked a little bit about that before, that of course there's terrible things in the world, but that's what makes life so beautiful, is that there's beauty that emerges from all of that. I guess if you're planting flowers, what do you have to put on top of the flowers to make them grow? Fertilizer. Right? So you have to deal with the shit to get the pretty flowers to come up. And a lot of life is like that too. It's tragic, but that's what makes it so precious. And so to be courageous is to break out of a settled mold. Because to fit into a settled mold, it gives you safety. So it's to be willing to sacrifice your safety to see what you could become. Now, what could you become if you break away from the safety? Oftentimes we think of it in just the positive ways. You can become yourself. Yeah, you could also get hit by a car. You could also die. Terrible things can happen to you. Remember those old stories about the knights who are going to the castles to fight the dragons, and typically the knights, when they cross the bridge, they look over to one side and they see a pile of bones of all the knights who've come before them. You're not guaranteed success. That's part of why it's so dangerous and so scary. Because you have to sacrifice the safety to confront the danger. It takes courage to break out of that settled mold, because in that mold you'll find safety. But most find conformity more comfortable. And that's true. It is more comfortable. In a sense. Now, you're always going to have that little gnawing feeling in the back of your head that you've sacrificed part of yourself so that you can fit in. But is fitting in so bad? No, not really. Fitting in is good. It feels better. But you're going to suffer for it. You're also going to suffer if you break out of that mold. We'll see. And this is why the opposite of courage is not cowardice. It's conformity. The opposite of courage is conformity. So conformity is to fit into a settled mold. Now, more properly, you'll see that conformity is when we do what other people want us to do. Okay? Conformity is when we do what other people want us to do. That's just to conform. Totalitarianism is when people force us to do what they want us to do. So the first one we do willingly. We conform willingly. So, again, that's not such a terrible thing, because at least you're making the decision to do it. You have a choice about what you're going to do. And so the opposite, therefore, of courage is conformity. It's not cowardice, because conformity is to do what others want you to do. And that doesn't take any courage at all. Okay? So understand that we oftentimes see things like this and we're like, that's right, you're a coward if you do what society wants you to do. He's saying, no, you're not a coward. It's just conformity. The opposite of courage is not just to be afraid. It's to do what is expected of you to fit in. And so again, as I was pointing out, though, that's your choice, though. Because if you're not going to fit in, then that means you're going to have to go alone. You're going to have to go solo. Which means that you're going to have to be willing to love your enemies and to hate your friends. You're going to have to be willing to stab your friends in the front. Because what that means is you're going to be pursuing the right thing to do, not necessarily the comfortable thing to do. You're going to do what's right, not just what's easy, not just what's expedient, but what's right. And that means you have to figure out what's right. And that means you have to separate yourself out from the crowd and the herd. And then that means, of course, you're vulnerable. And that's a really hard thing for us to be, vulnerable. Because to be vulnerable means to be, again, aware of your own mortality. When you look at regimes that use torture as an interrogation method, so for example, the Soviets, when the KGB, their secret service, would pick people up, first they would take them to a prison. First thing they would do is they'd strip them down naked. Why? Because when we're naked, we're vulnerable. That's a great way to take power and control over a person. Then they would shave their heads. Why? Because they're taking away their individuality. So now they make you vulnerable, and then they take away your individuality. Now you're not a person anymore, you're a number. You're a body in a room. And now you have no safety, you have no protection, you have no individualism. You might as well just tell them what they want to hear. That's how they'll interrogate people. And so we recognize that along with our vulnerability, the thing that we're afraid of, that makes us feel vulnerable, is the fact that we know that we're fragile. And that's a hard thing to confront, because that means that to break out of the mold now, you're going to have to willingly confront that thing. You're going to have to willingly step out of the safety. And you're going to get harmed, you're going to get hurt, you're going to trip, you're going to fall, there's going to be some damage done to you. And you're always going to be thinking, I could have just gone along with everybody. I could have taken the easy way. You could have just taken the easy way. And it's true, you could have always taken the easy way. But you didn't. And that says something about you. It makes you strong as an individual. Maybe not strong enough to stand up to the group just yet, but you're going to find that the stronger you get, the less the group wants to stand up to you as well. So, it's a choice. We're all going to die. It's the ultimate statistic, 10 out of 10. You can look it up. I'm not lying to you here. All of us die. The question is, are we going to confront it? Yeah. Are we going to confront the fear? You can't confront death. Well, you can, I guess. I've done it many times. But you can confront the fear of it. You can confront the fear of everything. Because it isn't that you won't be afraid anymore. You're always going to be afraid. The question is, are you going to go forward anyway? When you stand in front of something terrible, you stand in front of that dragon, who's not afraid of that? But who stands up and keeps going? That's the measure of a person. That's bravery and courage. 30 seconds to spare. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms?